Welcome to the Leader's Abstract, the podcast about the inner work of leadership. Here, we explore the ideas, habits, and blind spots that shape how mission-driven leaders show up for their teams and the communities they serve. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Rutter. With me today is Dave Casullo, founder and CEO of Danelli Partners. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome, Jeremy. I'm quite privileged and honored to be part of this. I've watched a few episodes and it's quite well done. So thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation. And we had talked briefly about some of the different speaker series and events that you've been to recently. You're quite well known in this community, and I've had the great privilege of hearing your leadership journey, which is fascinating. But why don't you go ahead and let our listeners know how you became to become the founder and CEO of Danelli Partners.
Well, I'm glad you found it interesting. It is unique. If there is a traditional path to founding a company like Danelli and actually pursuing what is the mission of Danelli, this probably is not it. You and I shared your story as well, which I find extremely interesting and unique as well. I think the best way to say it is, it started when I was the youngest of three siblings, and my sister and brother are quite older than me. My sister's 9 years older. My brother's 11. My brother is probably the more famous of us. Just ask him, he would tell you. He was an NFL football coach for a decade and went to 2 Super Bowls. And so you can imagine, in the household, he was not only my hero, but he was also, a strong presence, leader. My father, greatest generation, World War II, second day Normandy medic, tough guy, very strong presence. So, when I was growing up in the household, I was observant. I watched each of the players, including my sister and my mother, who were very, compelling, loving leaders in their own right. It definitely had an impact. It helped shape who I am. And then as I, left home, went to Hamilton College, played football there, was the captain my senior year, I started to realize that for whatever reason, I naturally sort of evolved and moved into leadership roles, even in my friend circles. And then when I got out of college and started my business career, same thing. I went into distribution. I navigated the various hierarchy and ultimately became a general manager of a beer distributorship at 26. And then started to feel like there was an entrepreneurial side to me, and started to pursue that. And so through the first part of my career, I played on the organizational side a lot of roles that are ones that taught me more about leadership through actually endeavoring down the path of leadership than I think even my MBA program and other things would have taught me. So that experience was fantastic all along the way. And then when I took the role of Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Raymore and Flanagan during a period of 10 years when that company experienced exponential growth. I got there when we were about 190 million in sales, and I left when we were over $1 billion. And during that period, our CEO, my boss, challenged me to build a leadership development institute where we knew we had a gold in the potential leader capabilities within our 5,000 associates. And he tasked me with sort of identifying the elements of leadership that were successful in our culture and building it into an institution and teaching people who had capability those competencies so that we could grow and penetrate metropolitan New York and other places that were, a major big uptick in, volume and our top and bottom line. And it worked. And so I started to believe that we had lightning in a bottle, that what we had created, the principles, were transferable and probably more important to gift to leaders who were in areas, geographically, institutions that were different than retail furniture, not for profits like the one you run, Jeremy, and to see if these principles actually have the same kind of impact in a variety of different environments. And it worked. I took the methodology. The company allowed me to take it with me as long as I didn't teach it to other furniture retailers, which I had no intent to do. And I was privileged to be able to have a book published by McGraw-Hill that essentially is the methodology. And the book's called Leading the High Energy Culture. So I took this globally. I bought into a company in Boston, and we worked with Fortune 50 leaders around the world. So, the principles I built into executive coaching and executive leadership teamwork, and I brought it wherever these companies gave me the opportunity to present it. And it was in places like Dubai, the UAE, places like Australia. We brought it into Japan, South America, Africa, and of course Europe, and of course across the United States. And it worked. Our company grew significantly. And then my kids in Central New York, I have 3 children. Lori and I married my high school sweetheart. Our kids started having their own children, and we're blessed with 6 grandchildren, and they're all here. Some of them are in Baldwinsville. Some of them are in Little Falls. So we're thinking, what are we doing in Boston? We need to come back home. So I sold my share of the company, and I created Danelli. And the idea with Danelli, Jeremy, was, as I've shared with you in the past, take the principles that we've now fairly well established their validity and apply them to what I called grassroots leaders. These are people like you and frankly me, who choose to point our blessings at a need that's really important to us and to the community in which we serve and the broader region. And when I was growing up, and my wife was growing up here in Little Falls, those are the kinds of people that took an interest in us. I call them grassroots leaders. They tended to be, the small business owner or the leader within some organization within the city of Little Falls. And for no other reason than they cared, they would take an interest in others and really start to shape something in us that we hadn't recognized that becomes really important to our success, not only in the moment, but also as we, navigate life. So I wanted to do that. And so we built Danelli to start giving those gifts of what we had established we knew worked to the leaders, the grassroots leaders in Central New York. Company was built on that mission and foundation. We then started to realize that most of these companies were concerned about talent acquisition, talent retention, and we realized that the pipeline, the bench for that talent was in the school systems. So we started to take our programs modified for students and build them into public schools here around central New York. And it worked. And so now we're in 21 school districts, 7 BOCES regions. We work with over 50 companies. And we naturally have positioned ourselves for this whole workforce development movement in a way that I think was serendipitous, really, but we're there. And we're really proud to be able to help with the revitalization of central New York, with the sort of infiltration and penetration of these principles that are really important. And Danelli is thankfully built to do exactly that.
That's wonderful. What a great story, and a great mission to be able to come back home and be able to bring up that next generation of leaders and refine that current generation of leaders. Mission-driven leaders are unique in how they work. And what we find is, nonprofits and grassroots organizations quite often are struggling for money. So their capital really is investing into their leadership, because that's where we get the guidance of making those connections. And when we spoke earlier, you talked about the unification across real and perceived borders and leader qualities that are important. What are you seeing as those qualities?
Yeah, that's hugely important. For whatever reason, um, and this begins more broadly than just central New York, but for whatever reason, there's a real divisive sort of sentiment that exists in the world, and we can point to media, we can point to politics. Um, it just is what it is. We can point to history. There's a very parochial kind of element to central New York. Um, Townships and villages that are long um, uh, um, deteriorated, I'll use that word, from the industrial age demise and so on, are still holding on to, elements of, um, parochialism that really no longer play to our benefit. And it's important to recognize that and to do something about it. And a good friend of mine is John Zogby. I may have mentioned this to you in our lunch meeting, Jeremy. John talks about this concept of culture lag. And essentially, it's when the narrative generationally continues to get passed down. And, the narrative here has been one of negative, implications, meaning, if you're smart and you do well in school, then as soon as you graduate, leave the area, go to Boston, go to New York, go to California, get out, because this place doesn't have the kinds of opportunities that you need or want. The weather sucks, whatever it might be. Those narratives have really embedded a sort of divisiveness and a negativity that is, tough to overcome. And so leaders, and I put myself in this category, I certainly put you in this category, who have chosen to come back and make a difference because something inside us sees something that matters. In your case, I mean, you serve, the population of aging people in, a quality of end of life that is really important, particularly given the demographics and where, the large portions of the population exist here. I choose to, focus on, the revitalization of the area because I believe in the quality of life here. It's a different narrative, it's safe. I appreciate the four seasons. Winter could be a little shorter, but hey, I appreciate the four seasons. The cost of living is low. There's things like an abundance of water, resources. You're close to a variety of different kinds of geographic environments. The Adirondacks, the Catskills, Canada, we're metropolitan New York. There's a lot to be said about this area. So focusing on being a unifying leader and identifying those who are also themselves unifying is the only way home, right? And people like, Steve DeMio, who has passed, he was the longtime leader of Mohawk Valley Edge. It started with a vision, right? And this is one of the elements of an answer to your question. Somebody who's capable of seeing past the current set of realities and envisioning what could be, but even more than envisioning it, articulating and communicating a version of it in a way that is so compelling that people are moved to act in some way. We call it at Danelli head, heart, and hands. People like Steve DeMio, when they articulate a vision of what could be, and he took over Griffiths Air Force Base after the Air Force had left, and he saw a vision for what it is today and beyond. And when he spoke to people, he not only spoke to their heads. Most leaders can do that, Jeremy. Most leaders know their business. They can talk about it in a very intellectually, compelling way, and smart people can, understand it in a way that is intellectually important. But it's not until you move someone at the heart level and you have them feel like something is important enough for them to do something about it, which is when they move their hands and they do something about it. So the first element of that kind of unifying leadership is the ability to envision a future that's inspiring and to communicate it to the various factions of people who are potentially going to be able to get something done. Secondly, I think, you have to be courageous enough to endure some of the, flashback that you are inevitably going to get. Change is hard. People in this area, particularly as they're part of this culture lag, are quick to be critical of anything that is apart from what they've come to believe. It's just natural. Social media and some of the other elements of how people receive information can be manipulated and used to create a level of antagonism or vitriol that is, frankly, I think even greater than just a generation or two ago that most people had to try to endure when they're making a bold assertion in trying to deliver, something that is a change from what people are used to. It's hard. So people have to have the courage, but more importantly, they have to have tested how strongly the belief that they hold inside really is to them. It's almost like a litmus test. Is this something I would die for? In my case, I mentioned that I have grandchildren in the area. I'm planting seeds in a garden that I'm likely never going to see in the larger picture. But I'm motivated to endure change and the reaction to change because I'm trying to create a foundation for my kids, my grandkids, and even more future generations beyond that. If you look at history, it's cyclical. So there's going to be a time when, this area is revitalized and maybe even more attractive than some of the more traditional areas where people move. So those are two components that I would point to that are really important. There's more, but you can see how leaders who adopt those two things are really critical to making a difference in any organization, but more importantly, in places here in central New York where you and I choose to focus our gaze here.
That's right. And I have a great friend from the New Hartford Rotary who has that very same belief. He's older gentleman, he's in his 90s, and really, really focused on the environment, is literally planting trees that he'll never sit under. And he says the motivation for doing that is for his grandsons, is that he wants to create this better world and this better Mohawk Valley for his grandsons, knowing that, he's in his 90s and he'll never really see these trees come to bear fruit. But it's an investment into the future. And that's really the sign of a great leader. And again, he's an environmentalist, but that's not his occupation. Um, his occupation was an architect, and so great guy, Chuck Tomaselli. If you know him, he is again with New Hartford Rotary, and is just has that kind of same passion. I find a lot of that passion here in the Mohawk Valley, kind of the love for home. There's a few places scattered across the state that really has that love for their area, and we put that investment into Old Forge being another one. It's just such a unique community, where you have leaders like you who are dedicated to saying this is a great place to live and to raise your family and to watch your grandchildren grow up too.
Exactly.
So we also talked about the unconventional way that we both got into our positions. Yeah, that's a leadership journey. I always talk about leadership journeys. I've kind of made my way around the block. I haven't moved as much as many people, but um, I did start. I'm a healthcare CEO locally here with a nonprofit that serves older adults in housing and in nursing homes and assisted livings. But that's not, when you think of kind of the traditional path, as you've talked about with going to college and getting a job and moving up the ranks, it's not really the path I took. I started in the Coast Guard in an engine room. Um, and, I did that essentially because I couldn't get into a 4-year college. My GPA was so bad. I went to community college. My GPA was so bad, I couldn't get accepted to a 4-year college. Um, so I joined the Coast Guard, and thought I would make a career of that, doing a trade as a mechanic. Um, Found out that that's not really conducive to a family life, and had a son that was born. And in fact, today is his birthday,
Oh,
27
fantastic.
years ago. um, and that really kind of changed the mindset of maybe the Coast Guard isn't the best for raising a family, and because we'll be moving around too much is what I had told myself. Um, Now, fast forward 25 years, all my kids graduated from different high schools, and my youngest daughter was in 5 different school districts because my career did end up moving around. So sometimes, I always talk about, God's plan and my plan. And my plan is always like this, gentle grade and slope that goes up. Um, and God's plan is not that. He's gotten me to where I was supposed to be. Um, you know, leading a nonprofit, leading an organization here in the Mohawk Valley, and I'm blessed for it. So, but it definitely didn't meet my expectation of not moving my family around. I wanted to settle into a place, and like I said, 5 different school districts. Um, we recently lived in Illinois, up in Woodstock, Illinois, and then you had just such a strong desire and pull to come back to New York State. Upstate New York is just one of those places that, as you know, it has a pull to it. It's just such a great place to live and raise a family.
No doubt about it. Um, there's a saying, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plan. Because, typically his plan is much different. I'm glad you brought God into it. I know we're both spiritual people. I definitely feel like a lot of the journey, as I look back, Steve Jobs, in one of his most famous speeches, I think it was maybe back in 2005, he was commencement speaker at Stanford, I think. And he told 3 stories. And one of the stories is entitled, "You can't connect the dots going forward, but you can and should connect them going backwards, looking backwards." And, your journey, I love when you say I was in the engine room, in the Coast Guard, and to know where you are today, it's like I don't think there's any logical, way for somebody from the outside looking in to say, okay, I can see how that path must have happened.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Same with my path. And, I think the common thing amongst in between people with stories like ours, Jeremy, is somewhere along the way. Life has a way of redirecting your path. David Brooks writes about it in his book called The Second Mountain. There's a priest who's sort of on the more liberal side of things, Richard Rohr, who calls it falling upward. In both of the books, point to the first part of a person's life, yours, mine. We're doing certain things and we're trying to find our way. We're trying to establish our own credibility. We're trying to create some, element of material prosperity that validates that, we know what the heck we're doing. And particularly when we have families, it's important to be dutiful and support the families. So we're sort of riding along this path and kind of not sure, what to do or where to head, but we're just kind of doing it. And then something happens. And in my case, I got fired as the president of, a $200 million multinational manufacturing company, a job that I had been handed that meant that I was the first non-family president of this company after 70 years. And it was where I thought I had aspired to be. And when I got fired, I realized, wow, when I reflected on it and started to think about, 2 sides of it, meaning one is I got there, so there must be some value that I've created that is part of who I am and what I can now maybe leverage in some meaningful way towards something that matters. The other side of it was, I was pretty miserable. There was a lot of reasons why I didn't like what I was doing and I didn't like who I had become. So that second mountain gave me the opportunity to sort of say, okay, I was 38 years old. What are you going to do now? How am I going to figure out what it is that I need to do? And part of the methodology that we've created helps people tease that out, because it's really important. Because like you, Jeremy, there's people with a lot of gifts that are important to people who need the benefit of those gifts. And if we don't figure that out, then we're creating an opportunity cost that's been missed But more importantly, there's people in the world that need what we have and has been built into us. You and I are spiritually, aligned. I think God built something into us that he's expecting us to do something about, that is the circle of grace and that matters to somebody else in some meaningful way. And we gotta find that way and do something about it. And when that happens, man, that's in my book, Leading the High Energy Culture, that's when the energy starts to really vibrate and magnify. It's like when you put yourself on that path and you recognize, okay, I've got certain gifts and there's a certain thing that I'm supposed to be aiming this thing at. It's kind of my calling or my cross to bear. Then I'm going to feel the internal motivation ratchet up. I call it self-efficacy. When you're on this path, and you know what I'm talking about because we've kind of had this conversation. When you're on this path and you found it, the little hurdles and the stuff that comes, before us that tries to throw us off, the path really don't matter. It's like what we've learned is truly important. And what we've learned we can do about that over the course of our, experience in life, we're gonna do something about it, come hell or high water. And when you get to that point, it's really cool because there's adjacent benefits, not only to the people that you serve, but the people watching you. Like you mentioned, your kids. One of yours in your life's goals was to not move them around a lot, but you moved them around a lot. Kids witness and observe what we do. And when we get on this path that is our blessing and they see it, they may never talk about it, but what they see is really compelling. And my kids and I they've brought it up to me in certain ways, and it makes me tearful, and I kind of try to turn it back to them and say, hey, I hope for you that you find whatever it is that is your meant path, what you're meant to be doing. And I think for the most part, they have already. I mean, they're in their 30s. And I think it's a function of exactly witnessing what they saw happen to me in some ways. And the support my wife has provided. And we could go on about this, Jeremy, for a long time, you and I. So I thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. We sometimes we call it crucible moments, getting fired from a job. Sometimes we call it God's plan. Either way, our reaction to it is really what forms us into the leaders we are. Dave, I want to thank you for being on the Leaders Abstract podcast. This has been amazing. Where can we find out more information about you and Danelli Partners?
Yeah, probably the best place, Jeremy, is online, danellipartners.com, and that's spelled DANELI partners.com. And, Google search that or me, and thankfully with technology, you'll find us.
That's right. Thanks for listening to the Leaders Abstract. These episodes are available anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn with any questions or suggestions. I've been your host, Dr. Jeremy Rutter. This has been your guest, Dave Casullo, and thank you for listening. This has been the Leaders Abstract.